When a clan is in dire straits, it births the call to a new hero. But this hero might not be the hero you expected or wanted. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review for V-BT08 Silverdust Blaze. We already looked at Kairo and Oracle Think Tank, and this time we're going to look at the new cards for Dimension Police, as well as their new archetype, or at least new archetype for Standard, that is Cosmic Heroes, with also a unexpected twist with the return of Metalborgs. So without further ado, there is a lot of interesting things that we can go over in this set review. So let's jump right into these new cards for Dimension Police and see how these new cards will upgrade the already existing Dimensional Robo builds with Ultimate Great Ayusha as well as Dieliner, and also what the new cards for Grand Gallop and Synbuster can mean for the clan. So like any other set review, we're going to start with the generic stuff, and we start off with the reprints, and Dimension Police, just like the other clans, got 2 reprint crit triggers, and just like all the others, it's gonna be 1 star because they're just generic reprints and they don't really mean anything. And also, just like all the other clans, they got 3 new triggers, and the first one I'm gonna look at is the new heal trigger, which is Cosmic Hero Grand Rescue. And it's gonna be, just like the other ones, a 1 star because there's no actual reason to play this over any other heal trigger, even though it has the Cosmic Hero name. Then followed up, we got a brand new draw trigger, which is Beast Fur Monster Momomosia, which is going to be a 3-star card for me because it just opens up more deck building options in the trigger lineup, because this is an actual new addition to the draw trigger lineup. Then also on top of that, they also got a new Sentinel crit trigger in the likes of Cosmic Hero Grand Beat, and this is going to be an obvious 5-star card because it is such a great card to include in the trigger lineup as well as in the Sentinel lineup, so it opens up a lot of deck building options for the clan. Then also in this same vein, we go into the new starter, which is arguably just a reprint, as they got Metalborg Black Boy. And this is just a generic starter like we see with all the other ones, and it also has the upgraded skill text for the shield ticket, but it's just going to be a 1 star for me because it's just a generic starter, and even it having the Metalborg name doesn't really mean anything for what the clan can do with it. Now on top of that, Dimension Police also got 2 new types of vanillas, and the first one they're going to look at is the Grade 1 double crit variant, which is Dimensional Robo Divelkin. And this is going to be a 1 star for me because I'm not really a fan of this type of vanillas, but maybe there might be use for it, as seen as Dimension Police can power up their rear guards now pretty effectively with these new cards, so there might be some actual value behind it having inherent double crit, but I think that's just a niche in a niche. Then the second type of vanilla that we've got is the 12k vanilla grade 2, which is Dimensional Robo Dieboat. And just like the grade 1, it's gonna be a 1 star, as I'm not really fan of this type of vanilla, and don't think it's actually gonna work because the grade 2s are actually way too important for Dimension Police. Now with those cards out of the way, let's jump straight into the actual cards, and we're going to start off with some interesting Dimensional Robo support, as these Dimensional Robos are quite interesting. And we're going to start off with this grade 1 Dimensional Robo Go Biker, and Go Biker has the following skill: auto on rearguard circle, when placed, cast rest this unit, and one of your Vanguards gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. If your Vanguard is grade 3, stand this unit. So unplace rest itself, give your Vanguard plus 10k is okay because it's actually a net plus 2k power on the board, because itself is an 8k, so you get more value out of it, and you don't necessarily have to call this behind the Vanguard, so you can still boost the Vanguard if you want to. But on top of that, if you're already at grade 3, and this is actually where then the skill becomes important, because then you have the power threshold, you can restand this. So it's basically on place, give your Vanguard plus 10k at that point, which is actually pretty solid. It's not bad, but it's pretty good. So I think it's a solid 3-star card that allows you to give some more power for free. Is it the best grade 1? No, not really, but it's a nice low rarity addition to Dimension Police, where if you want to get that additional 10k power, you could actually get it. Now another one in these grade 1 lineup that is pretty interesting is Dimensional Robo Die Scooper. And this grade 1 has the following abilities: auto, when rode upon, Look at 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 grade 3 from among them, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this is a somewhat of a grade 1 right target that potentially could fetch you a +1 for free, and it could also fix your right target as it could fetch you any grade 3. And it's seen as Dimensional Police and Dimensional Robo especially is very grade 3 dependent and grade 3 heavy. The chance of this actually going off is pretty significant and pretty high likely. So actually it's a pretty decent skill, but also on top of that it has a second ability, which is Auto Rigid Circle. When placed, one of your grade 3 Vanguards gets plus 5k power until the end of turn. So for free, give your Vanguard an additional power buff, so it helps with fulfilling those power thresholds. And it's a little bit weaker than Go Bike, but at the same time, this also has the added bonus of the potential grade 3 Searcher. Once again, I think it's a solid 3-star card as it helps with the consistency and it gives a little bit power, but I'm not so sure if this will actually get a place in the deck because you're already filled with really solid grade 1s. Then from that we go up the grade ladder as we start to look at the grade 2 Dimensional Robo, as we have Dimensional Robo Go Fire, and here we start to see an interesting weird pattern for Dimensional Police, as this card has the ability Auto Rigid Circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, if your opponent's hand has 10 or more cards, this unit gets power plus 20k and critical +1 until the end of the battle. So this can be a really strong attacker. It can be a 29k attacker with double crit, but only if your opponent has a pretty good hand size. This basically means in the current stage of the game, this skill does really absolutely nothing, because your opponent won't likely get to 10 cards in hand. And if they get to 10 cards in hand, then you probably are losing the fight because they can arguably guard against all your attacks. So I'm not so sure if this is really good. The opposite is, however, if they are at that many cards in hand, this allows you to then pressure them enough to potentially force out those cards. But once they go under those 10 cards, once they are at 9 cards, then this card becomes a vanilla that doesn't really do anything. So it helps you to get back into the game somewhat, but it doesn't really help you to win the game. So I'm really on the fence about this one, so I will give it 2 stars. I'm not so sure if this actually will become a solid card. And also the fact that it's a 9k body hurts it a little bit, so I'm not really a fan of this type of skill. Then in the same vein as that grade 2, we have this grade 3 Super Dimensional Robo Die Arm, and its ability is Auto Vanguard or Rigid Circle. When placed, if your opponent's hand has 10 or more cards, 3 of your front row units get power plus 30k until the end of each turn. So I am honestly more fan of this card effect, because this card allows you to get a power value before you start attacking. Meaning if your opponent just has 10 cards at the start of your turn, you actually can get a lot of value. And giving 3 units plus 30k power will force out way more cards than one card gaining 20k power and a crit. And also because that card is on battle, means that if your opponent guards against other attacks, that can basically eliminate the power potential of that grade 2, meaning you are always forced to attack with that grade 2 first. Now, even though this card has many things going for it, the issue is, however, it's on a grade 3. And I'm not so sure if you want to run a grade 3 like this, especially seeing your grade 3s in Dimensional Police, especially Dimensional Robo, can do way more than that and aren't behind the fact that your opponent needs to have 10 cards in hand. So just like the grade 2, I'm only going to give it 2 stars. But this particular skill will, in my honest opinion, will have way more value than the grade 2 if we ever get into a meta where it's very normal that your opponent will have 10 or more cards in hand on a day-to-day basis, or in Vanguard's terminology, on a turn-to-turn basis. Now, from those weird Dimensional Robo cards, we go to some more defensive Dimensional Robo cards, and we start off with this grade 1 Dimensional Robo Die Gyro, and its ability is Auto on Guardian Circle. When placed, cost retire this unit, and one of your Vanguards get power plus 5k until the end of turn. So what's interesting about this grade 1 is that it increases your Vanguard's base power for the entire turn. So yes, you lose 5k shield value for that specific battle, but for the rest of the turn, your Vanguard is sitting on an 18k base for each resolution of Die Gyro, which can be really good against multi-attack clans. However, the timing of this card cannot come at a worse moment in Vanguard, because we just had this Axel heavy meta, which was somewhat attacking around the lower end of the spectrum of power columns. But now we're starting to enter in a force heavy meta, and a force heavy meta, this card will absolutely do nothing. So yeah, the effectiveness of this card is relatively low, and we're starting to see also Axel decks becoming stronger and stronger with higher numbers. But there is still value in this card in a specific instance if the meta shifts again to a more multi-tech strategy with lower powers, because it giving your Vanguard an additional 5k power, and if you get a defensive trigger, means you're sitting at a solid 28k base, which is similar to what Majesty Lord Blaster does. So it can be useful, but for now it's really not. So for now I'll give it 2 stars, because it might have some value in specific instances, but it doesn't really look to be that instance is right now. Now the next defensive card is this grade 2 Dimensional Robo Die Dumper, and its ability is continuous on Vanguard Circle, all of your grade 3 units get shield plus 10k. So this is basically an extension of Die Liner, so you can actually guard with your grade 3 early. So if you have this grade 2 as a grade 2 right target and your hand is flooded with grade 3s, no worries, you can still guard with them. And it also synergizes with Dimensional Robo Die Scooper, as if you write this thing on top of Die Scooper, you can potentially fetch the grade 3, which then can be substituted for 10k shield. So there are some synergies between these Dimensional Robos. And on top of that, Die Dumper also has a second ability, which is Auto on Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, you may have this unit get power plus 10k until the end of the battle. If it gets plus 10k at the end of the battle, retire this unit. So it can buff itself up to then sacrifice itself after the attack. And this might sound weird for Dimensional Police, but it does have some synergies with certain other cards that we will talk about later in this video. So it's actually pretty decent, 20k attacker. Mainly as a Vanguard right target that gives you a lot of shield value and more potential out of your many grade 3s. So I think it's a pretty decent card, and I don't think a 3-star rating will do it justice for what it actually can do for Dimensional Police in general, and can also be a really good tech card for a budget alternative approach. Now another Super Dimensional Robo is this Super Dimensional Robo Die Roller, and it basically carries on this defensive playstyle as its skill is continuous on Rearguard Circle and Guardian Circle. If you have 2 or more grade 3 units, this unit gets power plus 10k, shield plus 5, and intercepts. Includes Guardian. So what I mean, if you call grade 3 to the Guardian Circle and this thing is on the Rearguard Circle, you can then intercept with it. So what's really neat about this card is that it can be a really solid attacker, because it becomes 23k on its own in the right circumstances. Because if it's on the Rearguard Circle and your Vanguard is grade 3, because that's the only reason how you can call to the Rearguard Circle, and you call another grade 3, you can basically fulfill its condition. So if your front row is filled with grade 3s, you can guard and intercept with these cards, but it becomes also a really good offensive option. And it having an additional 5k shield can be really good, because that combined with Die Liner makes it a solid 15k shield, which is equivalent to a critical trigger or a front trigger. So that's nothing really to scoff at. So it gives options, but sadly it's on another grade 3. It also doesn't have a force marker, and to be able to utilize it, as I explained, you need to have an entire front row of grade 3. So that will hamper with your offensive plays, because not every grade 3 will have intercept, and most of your powerful plays are with grade 2. So it's awkward to a certain extent, and it needs a lot of setup, and I think it's not good enough to actually make a spot in any Dimensional Police build, because its use is very limited. So I think even though it has a lot of value on the card itself, it just doesn't lend itself to be actually played. So I will give it only 1 star. It might see some play in premium with that heavy defensive build with the new stride that they got, but even then I'm quite skeptical how good this card actually would be in that format. Now with those cards out of the way, let's talk about one super generic card which is pretty good for Dimensional Police, and that is their new generic grade 3 searcher, that is Cosmic Hero Grand Robe. And Grand Robe is pretty interesting because it's the only grade 3 searcher which continues skill to get 5k power that doesn't work on the Vanguard Circle, because it only works on rearguard circle, as the skill continues on rearguard circle. And the reason for that is that its skill is during your turn, if you have a grade 3 or greater unit, this unit gets power plus 5k. So the reason why it doesn't work on Vanguard circle, you can never fulfill the condition because you cannot call a grade 3 on your grade 1 turn. So it's pretty logical to just make it as a rearguard circle skill only. So even though its condition is really easy to fulfill, just right up to grade 3 and then it's always active, it's the only grade 3 searcher that cannot gain its power on turn 1, turn 2. You always need to wait until it's turn 3. And of course, as I explained, it's the generic grade 3 searcher, so its other skill is, in rapid succession, auto Vanguard the rearguard circle. When placed from hand, look at the 5 cards from the top of your deck, reveal to 1 grade 3 from among them, and put it in your hand, shuffle your deck, and if you put a card, discard a card from your hand. Yeah, we're gonna do that more fast than every time we're having one of these skills, because we already know what it does. So this is obviously, you're probably not surprised, it's a 5-star card. It's a grade 3 searcher in a clan that revolves around grade 3s. That's pretty good. But on top of that, it's also pretty easy to gain the 5k power, so you can make easier, pretty good solid columns on the sidelines, and even if you want to put it behind your Vanguard. Now, with Grand Rope covered, let's talk about 2 very interesting and surprising support cards as we go into the Old Legion for Metalborgs. And we start off with the grade 2 counterpart, the Legion mate, Metalborg. Buster. And Buster's ability is auto on Vanguard or rearguard circle. When placed, if your Vanguard with Metalborg in its card name, so even if you write it, you will fulfill it, costs Soulless 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, retire it, and this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this for me is honestly a pretty solid okay card for a 3-star. The reason why is that just on play, Soulless 1, pop a card to give 10k power, it's pretty decent. It's probably not in the style of what Dimension Police wants to do, but having retire options for such a cheap cost and also get power on top of that is pretty decent. I mean, it's in my opinion somewhat of a better Stroboscope Dragon, because Stroboscope Dragon asks you to discard a card in the early game, and in the late game it just cycles a card on top of that. This gives you just under 10k power, which is actually pretty good if you ask me. But Buster never comes alone, because we also have the grade 3 Legion leader, which is Metalborg Sin Buster. And Sin Buster has the following skills: auto on Vanguard circle. When placed, search your deck for up to 1 Metalborg Buster, call to the rearguard circle, and shuffle your deck. So this is a 3+1 as it searches out the grade 2 to the rearguard circle. It's somewhat similar to what Draconic Overlord the Great did with Neoflame, only with Neoflame is from the drop zone, so not really from the deck, which is actually pretty nice. It's a 3+1, and because you then activate Buster's ability to then pop something and give 10k power to the rearguard, it is overall, it's a nice budget alternative because they're both double R, so they won't be that expensive. And interesting enough, this will synergize with another triple R, so you could potentially multi-tech rewrite into this thing, which then will superior call the Buster mid-battle, and that allows you to multi-tech also with your rearguards. And if you combine it with the grade 2 Die Dumper that retires itself, you can actually make room on the board to then call the Buster without calling on top of your unit. So there are actually some synergies here. Not the super strong plays, but it's really interesting to see what you can do. Now, of course, Metalborg Sin Buster has a second ability, which is act on Vanguard circle. Once per turn, costs Counterblast 1, and until the end of turn, this unit gets power plus 10k, and your opponent cannot call grade 1 or greater cards from his or her hand for the battle this unit attacked. So it's Counterblast 1, 10k power, and the Old Glory skill. In Standard, in a new reboot, that Glory Guard Restrict skill does actually absolutely nothing, because the Perfect Guards and the Sentinels are in the grade 0s nowadays. Either people are running the draw PGs, or they're running the Sentinel crits. Rarely do people run the grade 1 PGs. There are some builds that do that, but they mainly do a 2 and 2 split. So you're not going to get a lot of value of that guard restrict. And the 10k power for Counterblast, yeah, it's not the greatest trade-off, especially since the combo that I explained that could superiorize could actually Counterblast 1 to give the entire front row 10k power. So yeah, not so good. But then again, you're not using it for the act ability, and in the superior right combo, you cannot even use the actability of Sin Buster because you superior right during the battle phase. And you actually don't mind for that, because you don't really want to play Sin Buster for its act ability, if I'm going to be very honest. And because of that, I think Sin Buster is a 2-star card for me. It's nice that you can get a free call out of it. It's a 3+1 that filters from your deck, that also then rolls into some field control options. So there are some interesting options that you have available to you, which aren't really that known for Dimensional Police, because Dimensional Police doesn't really retire that much. So it's a nice addition in that sense, but besides everything else, it's not really that great of a card. Now, I already teased a little bit about this Superior Ride Grade 3 combo with Simbuster, so let's go over that card that actually can do it. And this card has also been regarded as the actual VR of the set, and you will see what people mean with that if you see the skill of this card, and then once you see the skill of the actual VR. Because the new Grade 3 Triple R card that is introduced in this set is Black Dressed Outstanding Deity Blood to Block. And Blood to Block abilities are act on Vanguard Circle once per turn, cost counter +1, and 3 of your front row units get power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is what I meant. 1 counter blast, you give your entire front row 10k. That's way better than what Simbuster does with its counter blast. So that's already pretty good, as it allows your grade 2s to hit for solid numbers, as most of your grade 2s already can get an additional 10k buff. So by nature, they could become 30k beaters without anything else attached to them. But that isn't the main attraction of Blood to Block. We also has its second ability, which is Auto on Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle it attacked, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 grade 3 from among them, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So at the end of the battle, you can potentially just go 3+1 for doing nothing. It's just check top 7, get a grade 3. Okay, cool, you have a grade 3, it's a +1 for free. That's actually pretty good, especially if you have a lot of grade 3s that you're playing in most of your Dimensional Police build, especially in a Blood to Black deck. So yeah, pretty good. But the skill doesn't stop there, because if you went second, then we get to this part, as the next part of the skill is if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, discard 2 cards from your hand, write a grade 3 card other than Black Dressed Outstanding Deity Blood to Black from your hand as stand, and that unit gets power plus 10k and drive -1 until the end of turn. So this card allows you to rewrite into any grade 3 from your hand, even if this was your first grade 3 turn, as long as your opponent is also at grade 3. So if you went second, you can immediately do this combo. So that's a way faster Ultimate Great Ayusha could ever be, because you can do it on your first grade 3 turn. And interesting enough, you could potentially just write into Ultimate Great Ayusha and get somewhat the same value, because Ultimate Great Ayusha on play skill for giving the front go plus 10k still activates. The only thing that you miss out on is the 10k of Ayusha himself, but Black gives the unit 10k, so it's somewhat the same, only -1 drive check. Also, another interesting thing is that this can be combined with any other grade 3. We can combine it with what we just talked about, with Simbuster, which then can call a Urbuster, so you can start to multi-attack a bit more aggressively. But this thing can also be combined with something like Die Liner or any other grade 3 that Dimensional Police might throw at us, and that in itself makes this card really, really good and really future-proof, as no matter what other grade 3 is going to come out, this card will synergize with it. And it will also synergize with Grand Gallop, that we're going to talk about in a moment here, as that will allow you to do some really interesting plays that focuses more on your rearguard units, as Black himself empowers your rearguards, but so does Grand Gallop. So with that all in mind, I think Black is a solid 5-star card. This is an insane support card Dimensional Police. It almost crosses the 6-star range, and I'm very, very tempted to actually give it a 6 stars, but I think its restriction that your opponent needs to be on grade 3 makes it balanced enough that you cannot do this whole shenanigans while your opponent is on grade 2, like we've seen with Overlord to Cross. So Black is a way more balanced out and fair card for Dimensional Police, because now Dimensional Police has an actual good play if they go second, and they already have a good play if they go first, because Die Liner is a thing. So yeah, Black, a really nice addition for Dimensional Police in the grade 3 department. Now, speaking of the grade 3 department, let's take a look at the new VR to have a better understanding of what this playstyle is for Cosmic Heroes before we go into the additional support cards for Grand Gallop. And that basically tells us which unit we have, because the new VR for Dimensional Police is Great Cosmic Hero Grand Gallop. And its abilities are on Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, activate all of the effects below according to this unit's critical. So that already tells us that instead of relying on power, this card relies on stacking criticals, which is interesting because it's completely different than Dimension Please did in the past. And those benchmarks are 2 or more criticals, all of your front row rear guards gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. 3 or more criticals, all of your front row rear guards gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. Keep in mind this stacks, so it will then be plus 15k. And then 4 or more criticals, all of your front row rear guards get critical plus 1 until the end of turn. So if your Vanguard has 4 or more criticals, your rear guards front row units get plus 15k power and a critical. That's not really a lot for the effort that you need to put into giving this unit for critical. And because you're forcing more on putting critical on your Vanguard and not power, that means Grand Gallop will be swinging in for 13k, but with a lot of crits, which is basically easy to guard. So that's kind of awkward, but there are ways that we can accelerate this because we can go for Force 2, that allows us to always fulfill the 2 or more criticals, and then with Grand Gallop's second ability, we can always fulfill then for 3 or more criticals because its second ability is Act on Vanguard Circle once per turn, costs counter plus 1, and this unit gets critical plus 1 until the end of turn. So you can, on a consistent basis, every time that you attack with the Vanguard, so every single turn, give your front row rear guards plus 15k power, and in some occasions also a crit on top of that. Is this great? Not really, but there actually are some interesting builds that you can apply with this card because now we're focusing on rear guards with the empowering aspect. That in itself means there are different playstyles that we can address for Grand Gallop. There are some units that can restand on a rear guard circle and do some interesting combo plays, and Grand Gallop allows you to empower those combos. And it can somewhat synergize with Black because you can go into Black. Black can use his counter blast skill to give the front row plus 10k power, and then from the Black you can superior ride into Grand Gallop, and if you went for Force 2, that means the moment you go into Grand Gallop, it will already have 2 crits. But there is a Grade 1 that allows you to give then a crit to your Vanguard, so you go to 3 crits mid-battle, and that in itself allows you to, once you swing again with the Vanguard, which then will be 23k thanks to the plus 10k of Black, only 1 drive check though, to then give those rear guards an additional 15k power. So that means you swung twice with the Vanguard, but your rear guards will be 25k stronger than they already would be at that point. So there are some interesting pointers here and some interesting things you can do. And because of the rewrite and you went for Force 2, that means the Vanguard swings twice with at least multiple crits. And you have 1 rear guard column that will also swing with a double crit naturally. So that in itself showcases what Grand Gallop can do. But there are some support cards that will make this card a little bit better than what we can see on this card. So let's go over those cards before we give Grand Gallop an actual rating. So the first support card that I'm going to look at is the Grade 1, which I already teased about with the combo with Black. And that is Dimensional Robo Dijacker. And its ability is very simple. Although on rear guard circle, at the end of the battle it attacked or boosted, cost retire this unit, and one of your Vanguards get critical plus 1 until the end of turn. So this can boost your Vanguard or boost a side column to then give your Vanguard additional critical. This works in any build, so it doesn't have to be with Grand Gallop, it doesn't have to be with Dimensional Robo. So if you want to have some generic crit pressure on just on every type of boss unit, this card applies that, so that's actually pretty nice, but it will cost you a rear guard because you need to retire it. So that might not be the most ideal thing. And in the Grand Gallop strategy that I just applied, you can boost this with Black, and then once you ride into Grand Gallop, you can use its skill to retire itself and then give Grand Gallop the additional critical, thus bringing your Grand Gallop's total critical to 3 crits if you went for Force 2. So there are some interesting things you can do with Dijacker, but once again, as I explained with all the other Grade 1s for Dimension Please, the Grade 1s are pretty jam-packed, and this is not good enough to actually make room for other Grade 1s in the generic builds. It probably will be played in the Cosmic Hero Grand Gallop build, but that's basically because of a necessity than actually because this card is really good. So for that, I think I can only give this card 2 stars because it's not really that great, but it might find its way in certain builds if you want to have on-demand crit pressure when you want to do such a thing. Then the other support card for our Grand Gallop is the Grade 2 Cosmic Hero Grand Revolver, and its ability is on a rear guard circle. When placed, costs Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets power plus 10k, and until the end of turn, if Great Cosmic Hero Grand Gallop is on your Vanguard circle, draw a card, and then one of your Vanguards get critical +1 until the end of turn. So for any build, it's a +10k for those resources, which isn't good, because you have way better grade 2s that can already get +10k for free. But in a Grand Gallop build, you actually get a lot of value, because you also draw and you give your Vanguard a critical. And depending on what your hand size is and what type of field you can build, you basically don't have to use Grand Gallop's critical effect, his counterblast skill, because Grand Revolver already can give you the crit, then a Force 2 can give you the crit, and then you have Dijacker that will also give you the crit. But if you have those key pieces in abundance in your hand the moment you ride to grade 3, you can make the active choice to go for Force 1 and actually start the pressure with high numbers on your side columns as well as your Vanguard column. So there are some interesting things this card allows you to do, and its skill alone has a lot of value and makes Grand Gallop a lot better. This card allows to make the deck actually do something, because you can already give +15k power, making this thing a pretty solid 35k power without looking at Black Superior Right combo. But then again, in that Superior Right combo, this card doesn't really work, because you need to place this card, so that's the main phase, and at that time you're sitting at Black, not in Grand Gallop. So there are some conflicting issues here. But overall, Grand Revolver, in my honest opinion, is a 4-star card, which definitely carries the Grand Gallop deck to an actual playable state. Now, with those cards discussed, we can go back to Grand Gallop and we can actually see how those combos interact. We have 2 cards that can actually give Grand Gallop a solid amount of crit pressure, but also because we use Force 2 and we can give those Force 2 to the rear guards columns, we can rely on certain other cards. We have the Grade 1 promo, the twin order, that allows you to give more power to your Vanguard if it's boosted and the amount of force markers. So that can also mean that your Grand Gallop can hit for decent numbers on its own. And there are definitely some interesting places you can do for Grand Gallop, and thanks to the 2 support cards, doesn't make this card dead in the water on its own. But it doesn't excuse that this is definitely a much weaker VR than we've seen over the course of the V series. This is a arguably bad VR. So for that, I only can give it 3 stars. It's an okay card that facilitates different strategies in Dimension Police, but we're not going to make the card better than it actually is. This card will probably not see competitive viability anytime soon, unless they make really good Cosmic Hero supports that make Grand Gallop insanely good. But for as far as I can see, that's not gonna happen. So as we see in Dimension Police, got some interesting support cards. I mean, we have the weird dimensional Robo support that works either on super defensive strategies or the fact that our opponent needs to have 10 cards in hand. And on top of that, we also got the Metalborg cards, which are pretty questionable because they focus around a Glory Guard Restrict, which is like 4 years too late to actually do something. And then on top of that, we have the Cosmic Heroes that are also really questionable in their power potential and what they actually can do, although there are some interesting strategies. But that said, the Great Researcher, Grand Robe, and Black is basically all the clan needs to actually make the deck or the clan a lot, and I mean a lot better, because those 2 cards can put in the work that Dimension Police actually needs. So yeah, even though the main majority of the support is questionable at best, those 2 cards definitely carry the set for Dimensional Police, and at the same time makes Dimensional Police support set, or this case split, if you could say, a playset of the entire support wave for Dimensional Police, quite affordable. It's not really that expensive, it's quite cheap actually. So yeah, you can see that as a good plus point. But with that stated, that basically wraps up this set review for Dimensional Police in V-BT08 Silverdust Blaze. So now I want to know what you guys think of this new support card, so let me know in the comments down below your thoughts and opinions about the cards for Dimension Police. Are you fine with what they got? Do you think I overlooked a certain interesting interaction or a combo? Is there some card that actually is pretty good but I just overlooked that? Or do you think it's justified and Black is basically the saving grace of the clan in this particular set? Whatever your opinion is, I'm curious to them, so let me know in the comments down below and let that discussion going. And with that, I want to thank my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com for making this video and everything that's happening on the channel possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by going down and hitting the subscribe and bell button under this video to be notified when we upload more content. But if you want to help us a little bit more directly, you can go over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one.